Hi everyone, the Partial Prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when Jesus comes, we will see fully. Okay, so today I got a video on June 2024, and I'm calling that the fiery furnace, and I'll explain why. So just a quick overview of the year. It's been a really interesting year with events going on. And so I felt like the patterns of January, February, and March repeated the patterns of this three supermoons that we had in 2019. And so I did talk about that in some previous videos. And what was interesting is that probably the one thing that stands out the most is on March 25th, there was a lunar eclipse. And that was when there was a UN resolution that was against Israel. Okay, and that was also on Shushan Purim, the second day of Purim. Okay. And then what we saw was that the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed the day after that UN resolution. So I do think that bridge collapsing was judgment for that UN resolution. It actually started on March 22nd. Biden had he tried to introduce a resolution and it didn't pass. But then taking up kind of borrowing from what Biden was trying to do, then someone else, I don't know who in the UN, introduced another resolution that did pass on the 25th. And they were trying to force Israel into a ceasefire. And so that happened on the 25th. So I do think that Biden gets kind of the blame for that because he tried to start it on the 22nd. So that was the beginning of the year. And then in April, we had the solar eclipse on April 8th. Okay. Obviously that was definitely something God was using to get our attention. Okay. And some things that I pointed out about the solar eclipse is the 8 stands out to me in the date, and then it was on 2nd Adar 29. So 29 stands out to me because I see that as like a number 11. Like if you add the 2 and the 9, you get 11. And so the solar eclipse was 1335 days from Trump's UAE deal. It was 8 months after Biden's Saudi deal, which was on 8/9/23. It was 6 days inclusive before Iran attacked Israel on 4/13/24. So right after, so the weekend after the solar eclipse was when Iran, tried to attack Israel. But that was the attack that really kind of bombed because Israel and its allies were able to shoot down most of those. It was drones and rockets, I believe. And then the solar eclipse was 1 week or 8 days inclusive. It kind of depends how you count it, before Trump's trial started. So that was kind of interesting. So you got that number 8 there. So yeah, we're seeing like the number 8 repeated, and the number 6 showed up. And then the solar eclipse was 10 days inclusive before the pro-Palestinian protesters showed up on April 17th. Okay. And I consider those protesters to be kind of the 10 horns of the beast. Okay. And so that would be the beast from the sea, because I believe that Biden is the beast from the sea. So these would definitely be people that are left leaning in their belief system. And so I consider them to be like the 10 horns of the beast. But also I think they fulfill the prophecies of frogs that we read about in Exodus and locusts, because they kind of show up everywhere. Um, and then the solar eclipse was also 19 days before Let My People Go on April 26th. Okay. So, um, so what happened on April 26th was that Biden plus 17 nations called on Hamas. It was the first time anyone actually said something to Hamas instead of bugging Israel all the time, to make a hostage deal. And so I call that like Let My People Go, because obviously it was kind of a call to let the hostages go. And so I thought that was interesting. It was right in the middle of Passover. And so Passover is the Jewish holiday that um, talks about the Exodus and the freeing of the Israelites from Egypt. So that was kind of interesting that they kind of had a Passover moment in the middle of Passover. Um, and then, but also on that day, we had 83 tornadoes in the country, and there was gorilla hail. So that was kind of interesting. Um, and then I talked about, I mean, I did a whole video on this, but I talked about how Trump did a campaign ad the day before the solar eclipse where he made himself to be the moon, which I think is really prophetical, because I think that it's possible that the sun represents Jesus and then the moon represents the false prophet that shows up before the Messiah, and I believe that Trump's that false prophet. Um, so definitely interesting that Trump made that video campaign ad. And then um, so I believe too that Trump's coming back as the eighth king. So that's why the number 8 is very interesting to me. And we actually see it in the year 2024 adds up to 8. But the solar eclipse was on April 8th. Okay, and then we moved into the month of May. And I call that the Northern Lights because that's when we started seeing the Northern Lights. So like on May 10th was when we first started seeing people in this country started seeing the Northern Lights. And then, so on May 6th, in the month of May, was the 42nd month after 11/7/20. So I'm keeping an eye on that 42 number because the Beast from the Sea only has 42 months. But obviously, it wasn't this 42nd month. Um, that was the end of Biden because he's still around. So there's another 42 that we're looking at, 42-month time frame. But on May 6th, that's when Biden threatened Netanyahu about going into Rafah. On May 7th, Biden spoke at the Holocaust Memorial Ceremony. And so that's where you kind of saw like the two sides of Biden. It's like, are you either standing with Israel or are you against Israel? And he's playing both sides of the fence there. And then also on May 7th, that's when Israel, they finally decided to ignore Biden and go into Rafah. So the IDF went into Rafah and they blew shofars. Because this was supposed to be the last area in Gaza to fight against Hamas, and hopefully bringing the end of the war. But it's still kind of going on. So, and especially because Hamas is sneaking out of the Rafah area and moving back into the places that Israel had already cleared. So it's not a good situation for Israel. And then May 8th, I think, is a highly important date. That was when Biden said he was going to halt shipments of weapons to Israel. So, I think he was, had a lot of anger at Netanyahu. I think because he didn't want Netanyahu to go into Rafah, but they decided to ignore Biden and go into Rafah, and so then Biden kind of had kind of a angry fit and said he was going to halt the shipments of weapons to Israel. Okay, what was interesting too on May 8th is that was Victory in Europe Day, kind of related to, not kind of, it is related to World War II. Um, so it's always interesting, kind of when certain events happen on key dates. So if you really wonder what Biden thinks about Israel, it's more about Biden just wants Israel to do what Biden wants them to do. Um, and it's more about Biden trying to make a name for himself. He wants to, he'd like Israel to stop the war because it makes him look bad that there's actually two wars going on while he is in office. Um, and so that's why he wants Israel to stop fighting this war. But I mean, they just can't. I mean, these people are their enemies and they're dangerous, and you just have to get rid of them. So then on May 10th, that was when the U.S. says that Israel's use of U.S. arms likely violated international law. So just, I mean, a continuation of people saying bad things about Israel that probably aren't true. Also on May 10th was when like I said, the northern lights were seen in much of the U.S. It was interesting because that was 22 years and 8 months from 9/11. So I thought that was interesting, especially because 22 is like a type of number 8 because it's the 8th day of the holidays, the 22nd. So it's like seeing two eights there. So May 14th was when Israel celebrated its 76th year of existence. May 19th was Pentecost, Christian Pentecost. And then what was interesting about that day was when Raisi, who was the Iranian president, I believe, died in a helicopter crash. So that was very interesting. On May 20th, was when the ICC issued arrest warrants for both Netanyahu and then like Hamas leaders. And so the ICC does, they're making Israel to be equivalent to Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. So that just wasn't good. Let's see. So May 22nd was the second Passover. And I wrote about the Sin Nations, which it like I put that in parentheses. I thought that was funny because it was Spain, Ireland, and Norway decided that they were going to recognize a Palestinian state. And then there was a tornado on that day in Temple, Texas, with 120-mile-per-hour winds. On May 24th. So while I'm talking about this, I think I might have covered a lot of this stuff in a previous video. So I don't want to go into too much detail because you could probably watch my previous video. But May 24th was when the ICJ ordered Israel to immediately halt their Rafah offensive. So, and they're the top UN court. And so Israel just has a lot of enemies, a lot of people against them, not a lot of people not really supporting what they're trying to do in Gaza. On May 25th, Italy said it would restore funding to UNRWA. And so what the reason why the funding was cut is that they were starting to see that UNRWA was helping the Hamas terrorists. So it's actually kind of dangerous because there's a lot of money that gets given to Hamas, like through like Iran, through what's that other country? Okay, I can't think of the other country right now. And so then they're able to buy off people like in UNRWA, with all this money that's being funneled into Hamas. Um, so that's what we're finding out. That's what we're seeing. And then, so that, anyways, so that's why they tried to cut the funding, but then Italy didn't support that. On May 27th, the EU had a meeting discussing sanctions on Israel, um, because of the war. So see how like a lot of these top um, courts and organizations are against Israel, and a lot of these maybe, well, like I know the United Nations started as a like kind of it came out of World War II, and they were actually started with good intentions, but now they've all kind of gone bad. Um, so May 28th was the official day that those sin nations formally recognized the Palestinian state. May 30th was when Trump was found guilty on all 34 counts. Interesting that happened on Iyar, the Hebrew month of Iyar, 22, so that 8 number showing up there. Gantz on that day submitted a bill to dissolve the Knesset. So Gantz, um, he's on the left side in the government in Israel. And so he's kind of turning against Netanyahu. I think he might be working with the Biden administration and being influenced by them, because he actually went to Washington to meet with them. Like, not really with Netanyahu's blessing. Um, so I kind of saw May 30th as like the two witnesses dying, because we had Gantz trying to, um, kill Netanyahu's government. We had Trump being found guilty. Um, and then it was interesting because that was the 70th day after Biden's UN resolution. So we see kind of like people losing power on either the 70th week or the 70th day. Um, so that's kind of interesting. Um, and then on May 31st, Biden did a speech where he wanted to make comments about Trump being found guilty. And then he had this whole peace and safety speech, because he just talks about how he had this 3-part proposal for Israel and how he was going to bring peace to the Middle East. And definitely a big peace and safety speech. So that's what happened then. And then this is my chart where I show, what I believe. This is from Daniel 2 in the Bible. He has a dream about a statue, um, and so there's 8 kings in the statue. Um, Well, so I take, because we get the idea of 8 kings from Revelation, and so I kind of mix Daniel's statue with the Revelation and came up with the 8 kings to fit into the different parts of the statue: the silver, the bronze, the iron legs, and so we read about how um like it's kind of like the 6 out of the 7 kings, somebody comes back, um because it says, the beast which was and is not. So this king lost their power, and then were gone for a while, but then they come back, and then it says is himself also an eighth and is of the 7. So one of these 7 is coming back, and I believe that's going to be Trump, and he goes to destruction. So we see that the 8th king does destruction. Okay. And then so I thought it was interesting. I saw this picture of Trump wearing one of his MAGA hats, and so it's got his 2 numbers, 45 and 47. Because obviously, um, he wants to come back and be the 47th president. Well, it's interesting because if you add up 45, it adds up to 9, and if you add up 47, it adds up to 11. So 9/11. Okay. So I think that's actually a prophetical picture that we're seeing there. I mean, Trump doesn't even know it, because I believe that 9/11 is kind of a picture of the Civil War in America, and um, um, because you have this, we have the South Tower and the North Towers fell on 9/11, and um, so in a way, you know, this is a prophetical picture about the Civil War that's coming. Um, so, um, and so, like I said, the solar eclipse, we saw the numbers 8 and we saw the numbers 11, so Trump would be number 47, which adds up to 11. Um, so definitely interesting. And so then this is kind of an overview. We kind of had a really long Easter, Passover, Pentecost season. So March 31st, it like the regular Easter was early and then the Orthodox Easter was later. And so that made the Orthodox Pentecost go all the way into June. Um, so kind of from March, the end of March to the end of June was Easter. We had Easter, Passover, and Pentecost all kind of in there during that time frame. Okay, so um, that's kind of what happened all the way up until June. So now we're into June, and so what I'm calling it June is the fiery furnace. Okay, so what I think we saw a lot in June was a lot of fires in America, and we saw like a lot of extreme heat, like the weather temperature was just hot temperatures in the country. And and so really, because what happened was on June 1st, we saw the corral fire started in California. Okay, so that was when we started seeing the fires come into America. Well, what else happened on June 1st? Okay, it was June 1st is the start of LGBT Pride Month. Okay, so let's read in Genesis 19. Okay, so in Genesis 19, which is up to the left here, it says, now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. Okay, so I don't have the whole chapter in there. So what the angels say to Lot, so the two angels say to Lot, for we are about to destroy this place because their outcry has become so great before the Lord that the Lord has sent us to destroy it. And then it says, when they have brought them outside, one said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you and do not stay anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains or you will be swept away. Then the Lord rained down Sodom and Gomorrah, brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. So one of the things is I highlighted verse 24 was when we see God raining brimstone and fire. Okay, so I think that 24 could connect to the year 2024. Okay, and so in June 2024, we saw a lot of brimstone and fire. Some judgment from God. And then I highlighted that there was two angels that came to Sodom in the evening. Okay, because in June was when we had the presidential debate. So I think like the two angels could be a picture of like Trump and Biden, and then the one Lot sitting in the gate of Sodom could be a picture of Netanyahu. Was a thought I had about that. So because we read in other stories like Mordecai, he had two angels that were at the gate of the city, and he turned them in because they were going to try to kill the king. Okay, so we have a lot of pictures of like two angels that aren't, and then like Joseph turns in two of his brothers, or tells on his two brothers that um, aren't playing nice, that are doing bad things. So we have kind of this picture of two angels that don't do good things. Okay. Um, so, um, so so the other thing we saw on June 1st was Hezbollah had a series of rockets, and the rockets from Hezbollah started causing fires in northern Israel. So Israel started having, um, I mean, it's not really starting. Hezbollah was kind of always been dropping rockets since October 8th, since the day after the start of the war. So Hezbollah, is up in the north of Israel, the other terrorist group up in the north in Lebanon. But we saw, on June 2nd, we started to see how these rockets were causing fires because Israel was hot and dry. Um, and then we saw also on June 1st that the World Health Organization was given Palestinian rights. Okay. On June 3rd was when the Hunter Biden trial began. The volcano in Hawaii erupted. Um, so kind of goes along with that fiery furnace idea. Um, June 8th was when, I mean, kind of a good thing was when four of the hostages were rescued in Israel. And June 9th was when Gantz resigned from the war cabinet in Israel. On June 11th, Hunter Biden was found guilty. On June 12th was Shavuot on the Jewish calendar. So I thought it was interesting that that was 612 and Sivan 6. So we see those six numbers on June 12th. Um, so what was interesting too was they had another rocket barrage from Hezbollah on June 12th. Um, June 13th. Okay, so besides it being Gay Pride Month, we saw some stuff with the Supreme Court related to abortion. Uh, so like if it's not bad enough that we have gay pride in this country, we also have this push for um, abortion for people wanting to kill their babies. Okay, so on June 13th, we saw that the Supreme Court maintained the broad access to the abortion pill. So that was terrible. Okay. Um, Also on June, in June, they had the G7 summit from June 13th to the 15th. Then on June 17th, we saw another. That was when the wildfire. See, this is the thing. The fires are starting fast and they're spreading fast. Okay, so on June 17th, the wildfire in New Mexico that started really fast and exploded. Started and exploded really fast, and they called that the South Fork Fire. Um, so there was on June 17th there was a pause in fighting in Gaza. Like Israel was trying to um like they announced on the 16th daily pauses, and they did their first pause on the 17th, cuz they were trying to let aid in and stuff. Um but then now June 17th was when the war cabinet was dissolved. Um, June 18th. Okay, so then Netanyahu was complaining during this time frame that the U.S. that Biden and the U.S. were not shipping the weapons to Israel, and so on the 18th was when Biden said the Biden administration denied that it blocked arms shipments to Israel, but we had some uh, congressmen that said that actually America was like kind of slow walking, was kind of the term that they used, the weapons to Israel. Here Israel's trying to fight a war, and um, Biden is, not helping. Even though it already passed in Congress, for these weapons, Biden was, blocking them. Um, and then on June 19th, okay, so this was another good thing that happened in June was Louisiana um, voted to, decided to put in 10 commandments in their schools, put the 10 commandments back. Okay, after years and years and years of no 10 commandments in our school. So what I thought was really cool is that happened 1 week after Shavuot, which is the holiday where the Jewish people celebrate the giving of the Ten Commandments. So that was really cool that that happened the week later. Um, and then on June 20th was the summer solstice. The sun at that point was at its highest point. And then on June 21st, the moon was at its lowest point. So that was really kind of interesting right there. Um, what was interesting is that the moon was kind of seen as orange because of the smoke from the fires. And since the moon was lower, the smoke from the fires affected it more. And then June 24th was the 2-year anniversary after Roe v. Wade was overturned. Okay, June 25th. Okay, so I think this is a significant, June 25th is a significant anniversary. Because it was 62 years after prayer was taken out of schools. Okay, so for 62 years, we've been a secular country. Okay, and that number 62 is very significant. So I have the verse, that, or a couple of verses that talk about 62. What's interesting about the date of June 25th is that's 6 months after Christmas. The other thing that was very significant on that date is that Israel voted on a draft for the ultra Orthodox. So ever since Israel was established as a nation, they were, letting the ultra Orthodox stay out of the military because they saw it as, like the ultra Orthodox would pray for the state of Israel. Okay. So it was a religious decision. Okay. They saw prayer as important, and the ultra Orthodox, especially, um, spent a lot of time praying. And, so they wanted to, you know, let them, continue to pray. And so, really, what they were saying with this vote is that now they are no longer a religious country, that now they've turned into a secular country, just like America did 62 years earlier. Okay. So, very significant and very sad. Okay. Um, so, um, see, now, so Israel was like kind of the message that they were saying by this vote is that power is more important than God, in winning wars, okay? That it's more important to have numbers in your military than prayer, okay? So that's just sad, okay? Because the Bible says it's not by might or not by power, but by God's Spirit um, that wins, okay? Um, So that's just sad. Okay, so Daniel 5:31 says, so Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. Okay, so we saw that in Daniel 5 we saw a shifting of um, the leadership, okay, at the age of 62. Um, so um, So that's why that number 62 is important. We can expect a changing of the guard at a 62 number. Okay. And so what I'm thinking is now that it's been 62 years after prayer was taken out of schools, we can expect the Messiah to show up really soon. Okay. Is what I'm thinking. Okay. And then we read in Daniel 9:26, it says, then after the 62 weeks, it has the word Messiah, but it means the anointed one will be cut off and have nothing. and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood, even to the end there'll be war, desolations are determined. So we see that 62 number is a picture of the anointed being cut off. Okay, so like I said, the changing of the guard. Okay. And then on June 27th was the presidential debate in Atlanta. Okay, I think that was a highly significant event. Okay. And so one of the timings of the presidential debate was that was at like 4 weeks exactly after Trump was found guilty. So kind of like we saw the fall of the two witnesses, but then 4 weeks later, like, okay, who really fell in the debate? It was Biden. Okay, so I think we're in a time frame now of we're seeing the fall of Biden. Okay, so that number four kind of goes along with Acts 1:3. We read about, to these he also presented himself alive after his suffering, appearing to him over 40 days and speaking of the things concerning the kingdom of God. So on June 28th was the 40th day after Netanyahu's arrest warrant. Okay. So the prophecy that we're seeing fulfilled, is, Netanyahu had his arrest warrant, his suffering was his arrest warrant, but he was still presenting himself alive for 40 days. Okay. And then we also see that number 4 connected to the 4 days of Lazarus. So Lazarus was like in the tomb for 4 days, but then Jesus resurrects him. Okay. So I think that's really significant. So it's like Trump was killed when he was, quote unquote, when he was found guilty, but now we saw a resurrection at the debate. Okay. And so remember that God is the one who raises kings and lowers kings. Okay. And so I think June 27th was very significant for lowering Biden. Biden had a lot of power, but now God's taken away his power. And then Trump had been kind of in a wilderness period for quite some time. And now, and it got to the lowest, when he was found guilty. And then now God's like raising him back up again, for his specific purposes for Trump. Okay. And then, so we read about the two witnesses. It says, after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who were watching them. And they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, come up here. Then they went up into heaven in the cloud, and their enemies watched them. And in that hour there was a great earthquake. So I thought it was interesting that it talks about the two witnesses standing on their feet, because it was interesting because the debate we saw, Biden and Trump standing on their feet for the debate. Okay. And then it's interesting that it talks about great fear fell upon those who were watching them, because everyone who watched that debate, all the Democrats now have great fear that Biden's gonna lose the election or make it harder for other Democrats. So they're all kind of in a tizzy right now. Okay. So interesting. And then the other time frame that connects to June 27th was 50 days after May 8th. Okay, so if you remember that, or 50 days after May 9th. So if you remember that May 8th was when Biden said he was going to halt the shipments of weapons. Okay. Then the next day was actually Ascension Day on the Christian calendar. And that was the day that Netanyahu, so May 9th was Ascension Day, and that was the day that Netanyahu said Israel is ready to stand alone, because Biden said he was going to halt shipments, and so Netanyahu said Israel had to stand alone. And so if you count 50 days after May 9th, you get to June 27th. Okay, so what I believe is that, um, I mean, sometimes you have to think about what would be the worst sin against Israel where God would bring great judgment. Okay, and so with Biden withholding the weapons, he's causing Israel to be in a more um, like dangerous position when they're fighting. Okay, the war has gotten more dangerous without these weapons. Okay, and kind of another thing too is that because they're withholding some of these weapons that, like, some of these were precision weapons, and so if Israel didn't have some of these precision weapons from America, they would kind of just have to use the bombs that they don't have as much control over. Well, so then that's going to cause more deaths, more people to get killed in Gaza, which is going to create more criticism for Israel. So that was kind of another thing that happened with that. And so what's interesting is we read about, so the holiday of Shavuot is the holiday of 50. Okay, I mean, so the Christians, call it Pentecost, and the Jewish people call it Shavuot. And they start counting 50 days from the second day of Passover, the Jewish people. Okay, and so we read about in Leviticus where God tells them to count 50 days. He says, "You shall count 50 days to the day after the seventh Sabbath. Then you shall present a new grain offering to the Lord." So what I'm wondering is if there's kind of there's a hidden prophecy in this count, because I always thought that with Biden being the seventh president, that his presidency would be considered like the Sabbath. Okay, um, and so then, um, um, so sometime during Biden's presidency, he committed the sin of withholding the weapons. Okay, so that was the fullness of his sins. And so that would be, um, so that could be like the seventh Sabbath. Okay, like the fullness of his sin. And then you start counting 50 days after the fullness of his sins. Okay, that's how I'm looking at it. And then, because then what happens is after these 50 days, you present a new grain offering to the Lord. So that's a picture of your switching leadership. Okay, so Biden's losing his leadership, and then now Trump's coming back with new power. Okay, like a new grain offering. Okay, and like I said, it connects to the two witnesses. And then okay, so that's the 50 days. Okay, so I consider the debate kind of a type of Shavuot. Okay, 50 days from the Ascension Day. Um, then, because the other thing that was really interesting about June 27th is that it was 3 years after the 70th week. Okay, so the 70th week was 70 weeks after the deal of the century. And that was when we saw both Trump and Netanyahu lose power on the 70th week. Okay. Which I definitely think was judgment and a fulfillment of the 70th week time frame that we find in Daniel. And so, because what happened is that Netanyahu, he was replaced in the government, and then Trump was kicked off of Facebook and Instagram in the 70th week. Okay, during that 70th week time frame. Okay, so now we're at the 3 years after the 70th week. And so that three number is like a picture of resurrection. Okay, so Trump and Yahoo lost their power at the 70th week, but then 3 years later, now they're coming back. Okay. Um, let's see. And then, okay, so then also on June 27th, we saw the Supreme Court decided to allow them, keep allowing the emergency abortions in Idaho to stand temporarily until they look at it later or whatever it is. So just during Gay Pride Month, we saw, besides all the Gay Pride stuff going on, we also saw the abortion pill, like voted in, and the emergency abortions to continue in Idaho. So, then can we wonder why we saw judgment of God in terms of extreme heat, fires, volcanoes? And then June 30th, the last day of the month, was the Pride Parade in New York City. Okay, so definitely Sodom and Gomorrah picture there. And so I think I talked about this in my last video, the Passover Exodus connections that I've been seeing. So on 413 we saw, so I talked about like the fiery hail, because okay, so Exodus is, we would read about that in the book of Exodus. That's when Israel, like first it started with Israel were slaves in Egypt, and then God sent all these plagues. 10 plagues. Okay, well, now we're in the greater Exodus, so there's going to be even more than 10 plagues. Okay, and God is judging the gods of, Egypt, or the gods of the nations right now, with his various plagues. And so what we can see is that God is getting ready to set his people free. Okay. With these plagues that we're seeing. Okay, so then on 413, I thought, like, if you read the description of the hail in the book of Exodus, it was fiery hail, and so that could connect to Iran's drone and rocket attack. But what's interesting is when you read about the hail, it says there was no hail in Goshen. So, kind of interesting that Israel actually didn't get that affected by this drone and rocket attack, by the grace of God. Okay. So Goshen would be the place where the Israelites were. Okay. So definitely a picture of Israel. Okay. On 4/17th, so I called these pro-Palestinians, so I talked about that before. I called the pro-Palestinian protesters locust. But or also frogs. But then we actually saw cicadas coming out in April. The two different types, coming out. So like kind of like actual locusts kind of thing. Then on 4/26 was, like I said, that let my people go date. Statement from the Biden plus the 17 nations. So, but other Passover connections. So we see the slavery in Israel and America. So right now, like God's people are enslaved in America to, especially to Biden and the left. They're taking all our money and using it for the left's agenda. Okay, so it's like we're slaves, making this money so they could do their agenda. I think there's a lot of other ways that we're slaves in America, like we're enslaved to the climate change thing, and so now we don't have bags in our grocery stores, is just an example. The economy, because Biden's been spending all this money, he's making the prices go up, so that's making us like a type of slave. Um, um, Anyways, so I could, I wish I could come up with more examples, but we're definitely slaves in America. But Israel, they definitely have the biggest picture of being slaves because of the wars, because of the war going on in Gaza, and then because of the attacks from Hezbollah in the north. All the people that lived in the border, near the border on the south of Israel, and then near the border in the north of Israel, they're all displaced from their homes and their businesses, and they're having to live in hotels in the middle of Israel. Um, and so they're not able to work, they're not able to be in their home. Like there's 80,000 uh, Israelis that are misplaced from northern Israel, is the number I've heard recently. Um, and so then the other thing too is that because of this war, the tourist, um, the tourism in Israel is just really at a standstill. I mean, I think it happens. There's some people that are brave that they go, but it's just not up to the numbers that it would normally be because of this war. So people in tourism are losing money. Um, so they're really enslaved to this war. And then, and especially because Biden's been, just really bugging Netanyahu, and it's been slowing down the war. So it's just going on and on. And then the worst thing, too, is the people that are actually, so this is the biggest picture of slavery, is the Israelis that are actually hostages, that um, Hamas took on October 7th. Okay. And so the number now is like around 120, but nobody knows for sure how many of those people are still alive. Okay. But the ones that are still alive, they have been hostages for, it's 9 months now. And I think today's the day of 9 months. Or it was July 7th would have been 9 months. So it's terrible. Can you imagine being a hostage for 9 months? Yeah, so as of Sunday, it's been 9 months of this war. Um, anyways, and so then, um, so another way we're seeing an Exodus connection is we're seeing, so back in the original Exodus, God made a mockery of the Egyptians. So we've seen various ways now that God is making a mockery of his enemies. Okay, so a while ago, Biden was called an old man. That was connected to his document case. But, we're seeing it. Um, uh, uh, so we're seeing it even more with the presidential debate. Okay, the presidential debate was a disaster for Biden. Okay. The other ways God's making a mockery of his enemies is, oh, well, so Biden's pier in Israel got ripped apart by sea waves. Okay. It just ended up being a big disaster and costing America a lot of money. Um, and then we saw too that Iran's attack on Israel was a bust. And then, some examples of God's judgment on the gods of Egypt, or the gods of his enemies, or the gods of the nations, was we saw the windmills whipped apart by a tornado just like they were toothpicks. Okay. We're seeing nonstop airplane events. Just kind of interesting. I always think when we're seeing airplanes fall or having trouble flying, it's God's way of saying that there's going to be a change in leadership. And then we're also seeing Hamas won't accept the peace plans. Okay. And so all these people that, are desperate for peace, and that's kind of their God. Um, and that are looking to Biden to create peace. Hamas is frustrating their plans. So, so I mean, you can't get peace without God, So if you're looking to humans to create peace in the world, you're not going to find it. Um, and then, so I talked about wild animals running loose. So we've seen sharks biting people. We saw elks attacking people in Colorado. The bearded dragons were causing a salmonella outbreak. There's been bears. There's been zebras running loose in Washington. There was a bull out of control in Oregon. the diseases that we've seen, COVID, bird flu, measles, West Nile virus. Just the other day, I heard someone actually had the plague. So, thought that was really interesting. Um, and then, of course, there's all the weather events that we're seeing, the nonstop tornadoes in America, the flooding, the hail, the wind events, the earthquakes, the volcanoes, the fires, the heat wave, the mudslides, and now, oh, I should add hurricanes to that list because now the hurricanes are coming. Um, so that's what we're seeing. Um, so lots of plagues going on. And then the Holy Week connections. I talked about Gantz is kind of working with the Biden administration. So we saw him go to D.C. 4 weeks before Easter. And 70 weeks, 4 days after the Maritime Agreement. Um, and so, like I said, the middle of that 40th, that 70th week, so another type of 70th week. So, um, um, so he's being a type of Judas, okay? He's betraying Netanyahu, okay, and trying to go after Netanyahu's job, okay? And then on and then I said on 5:30 he submitted the bill to dissolve the Knesset, so um, anyways, so that connects to Judas. So Psalm 41:9 says, "Even my close friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me." Okay, so we're seeing Gantz fulfill the Judas picture, um, that comes out of Holy Week from the Gospels. We saw the testimony in Trump's trial began on Passover Eve. So, during the Holy Week was Jesus's trial. Okay. The college protest turned into rioting on the first day of Passover. So we saw that rioting that we read about, so they were worried about rioting happening during the holiday and in the Gospels. And because they didn't want to arrest Jesus because they didn't want rioting to start. But we saw in our time frame rioting happening on the first day of Passover. And so I think I already talked about this. Louisiana, the Shavuot connections is Louisiana putting in the Ten Commandments 1 week after Shavuot. So then the other thing that I thought was connected to Shavuot was, okay, so in Exodus 32 we read, "Now when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled about Aaron and said to him, 'Come, make us a god who will go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him.'" So what we saw is that Jesus did not return to the world on Shavuot on June 12th, 2024. Okay, but what we saw was on June 13th to the 15th was the G7 summit. And what was interesting is that was the 50th with their many gods. Okay, so it's like a picture of people asking Biden to build them, build a god for them or build many gods for them. Okay, so some of the gods from the G7 summit would be advancing international peace, security, and prosperity. That's a term that comes out of the G7 summit. They were supporting Biden's ceasefire deal for Gaza. Climate change, of course, with G7. Security agreement for Zelensky in Ukraine. What was interesting this year is on June 14th, the Pope was at the G7 summit. So, like, he was the false prophet. Because we've seen, I think the Pope was talking about, maybe he was talking about climate change. Let me see if I can find that where I wrote down what the Pope talked about. Pope. Let's see. It's not jumping out from my notes just yet. But anyways, the Pope talked at the G7 summit, um, and just whatever, something that would not be, um, something from God. Um, so sorry that I can't find that right now. Anyways, and then what was interesting with the Pope being at the G7 summit is we saw all these Biden and all the other leaders were like kissing the Pope. Okay, so he's definitely like the false prophet of this one world religion of Biden and G7 and all that stuff. Um, so definitely. Um, and then what I think is interesting about Shavuot, so we read about in the New Testament that no one knows the day or hour. I'm wondering if Shavuot connects to no one knows the day or the hour, because there's a big debate about when you start counting the 50 days. Okay. Um, and so, like I said, I think it's possible that um, the 50 days, the prophetical picture of counting the 50 days connects to you start counting after Biden's big sin, um, the fullness of his sins. Um, So it says in Leviticus 23, it says, you shall also count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day when you brought in the sheaf of the wave offering, there should be 7 complete Sabbaths. So there's a big debate of what the Sabbath is. Is it the day that you rest on Passover? Is it the actual Sabbath, Saturday? It's a big debate. So it's interesting because it's a big debate in among the Jewish people. Um, Although most of them kind of follow the traditional. They start counting on the second day of Passover, but then it's interesting too because you have um, Orthodox has their Pentecost day is different than the regular. They kind of have well, they don't have a debate, but they have different calendars, the Orthodox Christians and the regular Christians. And so they have Pentecost on different days. Okay. Um, and then especially when you bring in like the Messianics, there's like just a whole bunch of theories of when you start counting. And so there's a million dates where people are counting. Okay. So I think that could connect to no one knows the day or the hour. So then the scriptures go on to say, Leviticus 23:16 says, you shall count 50 days to the day after the seventh Sabbath. Then you shall present a new grain offering to the Lord. You shall bring in from your dwelling places 2 loaves of bread for a wave offering, made of 2/10 of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour, baked with leaven, as first fruits to the Lord. So I think those 2 loaves of bread could be a picture of the 2 witnesses because they're baked with leaven. So they're not the unleavened bread that represents Jesus. Okay, so they would be like the false prophets, the false leaders, full of sin. Um, um, or the 2 loaves can either represent Trump and Netanyahu, or it can represent Trump and Biden. Okay, because we saw them, like I said, after the 50 days, we saw them at the debate. So like I said, 7 complete Sabbaths is a picture of the lampstand completely lit, is a picture of the fullness of Biden's sin. Um, so that's that. And then we read about time times and half a time, which connects to 42 months or 3.5 years. And so I definitely think that um, Biden is only going to be given 3.5 years or 42 months. Okay. It's just when you start counting the 42 months from the day that he was the election, from the day they declared him the winner, from the day of his, um, uh, the electoral college vote, or from the day where he actually started his presidential term, which was January 20th. And I was always hoping it'd be one of those earlier dates because that means that Jesus would show up and we'd be out of here sooner. But I think we're getting to the end of the um time frame. So let me find so the date that I'm looking at, okay, so the 42 months. Okay. So July 19th is the date of the 42 months of Biden after January 20th. Okay. Um, and so something's got to happen either right around that day or right before that date. Because I just don't think he gets any more time after those 42 months. Okay. Because, and then I highlighted the verse where it says, and as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. So you could look at Biden taking away the weapons, could be a picture of shattering the power of the holy people. It could definitely be, Biden shattering our power of the Christians in America. So, oh, but also the other thing I wanted to say too, because the Bible talks about times, and half a time, which we know to be 3.5 years. But I always think of that half a time could connect to the it's also called the dividing of time. I think that could connect to the Civil War. Well, um one thing that's interesting with Biden cutting off the supply of weapons to Israel, that's a picture of Biden dividing the bond between America and Israel. Okay. So he's making a separation. Um, what I believe is that America represents the 10 lost tribes, and then Israel is the remaining tribes. Okay, and so Biden, dividing the bond between America and Israel is like dividing Israel. Okay, um, and so then when God says when you divide Israel or divide the land or then whatever you do to Israel happens to you. And so, because Biden was dividing the bond between America and Israel, we can expect God to bring judgment of civil war to Biden. And actually, we're already seeing the fulfillment of that with the Democrats. Okay. So, Biden is suffering from, there's kind of like a civil war, a big debate going on right now with the Democrats because there's the ones that want to keep Biden as as the Democrat candidate, and there's the people that want to get rid of him. Okay, so it's interesting that now you could see them kind of arguing with each other. Um, so that's interesting. So we've already seen that, but I also think we're going to see the big civil war when Trump returns with all his peeps or minions or whatever you want to call them, his 10 horns, and they start the civil war in America and go against the left. So I have other verses here which I think could be the fulfillment of withholding weapons. Okay, so I'm wondering if Vashti didn't bring her beauty on the seventh day could be a picture of Biden withholding weapons. But then I'm also wondering too, like another fulfillment of Vashti coming with royal crown to display her beauty. Also, the fulfillment of that could also be the debate. Okay, so Biden is Queen Vashti that didn't come with royal crown at the debate. Okay, and so they didn't see Biden's beauty, or just a strong presence at the debate. So the left's kind of up in arms. Okay. Um, And then we read about in Psalm 78, it says, the sons of Ephraim are archers equipped with bows, yet they turned back in the day of battle. Okay, we could definitely, Biden withholding weapons could definitely be a fulfillment of that verse. Okay, that America, we were equipped with bows, we had the weapons, but we turned back right when Israel needed them to fight their war. Okay, Daniel 9 talks about after the 62 weeks, the anointed one will be cut off and have no one. So the anointed one being cut off could be a picture of Israel being cut off because, like I said, Netanyahu, said now Israel stands alone. Okay, so Israel was feeling cut off, um, from its allies, and feeling like they had to stand alone in this war. And then in Malachi, we read about, will a man rob God? Yet you are robbing me. But you say, how have we robbed you? In tithe and offerings. You are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation of you. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, so that there may be food in my house, and test me now in this, says the Lord of hosts. If I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you a blessing until it overflows. So I think this could connect to the verses where we know if you bless Israel, you'll be blessed, and if you curse Israel, you'll be cursed. And so I think this is another way of God, for God to say that. So God said, because you're holding back the tithes and offerings, you're going to be cursed with the curse. Okay, because you're robbing me, and so so Biden is not offering the weapons to Israel. So he's going to be cursed with the curse. Um, and then I think the whole picture of how they withheld straw, they wouldn't give the people straw to make brick. In um, you know, when Moses went to try to set free the Israelites from Pharaoh, instead of the Israelites getting freed, they cut off the supply of straw, um, so that it made it harder for them to make bricks. Okay, and so what we see in the scripture is that bricks were used to build the Tower of Babel. Okay, so Biden wants Israel to build his Tower of Peace. Okay, that's why he wants them out of Rafah. Okay, because Biden wants to look like some great savior that brought peace to the Middle East, okay? But so many people are frustrating him. Israel's frustrating him, and Hamas is frustrating him. Well, so then, because, okay, so the verse says, the foreman of the sons of Israel saw that they were in trouble because they were told, you must not reduce your daily amount of bricks. So they wanted Israel. Okay, so Israel was expected to limit the number of civilian casualties in Gaza during this war. But America would not give them the smart bombs that would help with that. Okay. So they're seeing in Israel how they're in trouble if they're not given these bombs from America, because it is going to cause more um, civilian casualties. Okay. So I think that could be some of the prophecies that are being fulfilled with Biden withholding weapons. So, like I said, I believe Biden is the beast from the sea with the 10 heads. 10 heads, 10 horns, 7 heads. Um, um, the 10 horns, could be the protesters. The 10 heads, at one time too, there was 9 Arab nations uniting with the U.S. to push Israel into a 2-state solution. And then, like I said, the 10 horns could be the BLM protesters that we saw in 2020, and then now we're seeing the pro-Palestinian protesters starting in April. So that's the 10 heads, or the 10 horns, and then the 7 heads. I probably should change the slide so that it doesn't say 10 heads. um, I guess I was, yeah, because I had Blinken meeting with 9 nations. And so that could be a picture of the 10 heads too. I mean, I think there's multiple fulfillments. But this, the 7 heads definitely connect to G7, I think. Um, so, um, and then I talked about this before with the 7 blasphemous names of the beast from the sea. I came up with 7 different ways that Biden, had said bad things about Israel. And I talked about this in my previous videos. But I was wondering, the last one that I had was on May 31st. Biden claimed that Israel submitted a 3-part peace proposal and said that Hamas is no longer capable of doing another October 7th. But I'm wondering if maybe a better one instead of that one would be when Biden on June 18th said he denied that he blocked weapons shipments. So that was making Israel look bad. So it's hard to know what are the 7, blasphemies against Israel of Biden, because it seems like there's so many of them. I mean, it's possible the 7 could connect to like categories of lies that are being said about Israel, instead of 7 different events or statements that he said. Um, so, um, anyways, but he's definitely said enough to kind of fulfill like like the menorah is definitely fully lit. He's said enough about Israel to make him look bad. Um, and then I talked about Biden's 9/11 connections. We saw Trump with his hat that says 9/11. Well, Biden's birthday on the Hebrew calendar is 9/11. He was declared the winner 9 months, 11 days after the deal of the century. So what's interesting is that I think, like, since we saw Biden being declared the winner 9 months, 11 days after the deal of the century, we could maybe see his fall 9 months, 11 days. Like, well, one thought I had was, so we're approaching, so like I said, we had Saturday or Sunday was the 9 month of the war. Okay. So the 9 month, 11th day of the war would be July 17th. Okay. So that's definitely a high watch date. I'm looking at the whole, well, I have a slide. We'll talk about that then. But if we saw a 9/11 number connected to the rise of Biden, we'll probably see a 9/11 number connected to the fall of Biden. But like I said, Trump's got it on his hat. So, anyways, you could read these over if you're interested. I talked about it in a previous video. And then we see that those numbers 11:9 in Revelation 11:9, when it's talking about the 2 witnesses. So that's interesting. Okay, so one of the things we read about in Mark is that it talks about, you know, it talks about the tribulation, which I believe we're in tribulation. I don't know who would believe that we're not in tribulation. I think they're kind of delusional if they don't believe we're in tribulation now. I mean, I don't agree with the traditional teaching of 7 years of tribulation. Except that, the way it's been taught, because they think like the Antichrist comes and he makes a covenant, and then there's 7 years of tribulation, and I mean, actually, with Trump having 4 years and Biden with 3.5 years, that's 7 years of tribulation. So tribulation during Trump and Biden. I mean, I definitely think that's true. And then I think we had 7 to 8 years with Obama too. Um, um, but anyway, so I'm not looking for. So I think we're in tribulation right now. Okay, because it says for those days will be a time of tribulation such as has not occurred since the beginning of the creation which God created until now and never will. So if you don't see everything that's happening, there's so much bad stuff that's going on, and I mean, people are, dying in strange ways. Just a lot of like sad stuff going on. Um, um, anyways, so um, it goes on to say, unless the Lord had shortened those days, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect whom He chose, He shortened the days. So one thought I had is, shortening the days, does that connect to shortening the time of God's wrath? Because if God doesn't put an end to His wrath, we could all be wiped out. Okay, because God has plenty to be angry about. Another thought I had was, is the time being shortened so that Hezbollah won't attack Israel? So Turkey has said that if Hezbollah starts a war with Israel, they'll help Hezbollah. Turkey said that. Iran said that too. Okay, so this could definitely blow into some major world war. Okay, so is God going to shorten the time so we don't have to experience that? I mean, sometimes with the wars in Bible prophecy, they could connect to the wars that happen when Messiah um, um, comes into power. Okay. So that's why it's a little hard to see when the wars are going to happen. Are they going to happen before Messiah comes or after Messiah comes? I mean, obviously, right now we have the war in Ukraine going on, and we have the war in Israel going on. Okay, and I think it's very significant that we're at the time frame of 9 months of war, because what if God is using the war in Israel to birth the Messiah, to prepare people for the coming of the Messiah? And so if that's true, we're in that time frame of the birthing, the 40 weeks of the war. 40 weeks of war happens on July 12th. Um, um, but like I said, 9 months, started on July 7th, but when is the baby born? 9 months, 4 days, 9 months, 11 days. I'm not really sure. So, um, anyways, and then, is God trying to shorten the time before Iran or Russia decides to attack Israel or America? So, I don't, at the time that I was making my slides, Russia had like kind of his warships on like near America's borders. Um, so there's, definitely a desire there. And especially like people are nervous now that Biden has showed all this weakness. Is that going to embolden our enemies? Okay. So, and then I did this little chart. So one of the things with Trump's deal of the century, quote unquote, it happened 1290 days after the Republican National Convention in 2016, which was when Trump was made the candidate. Um, um, and so we see that 1290 number. The 7 weeks after the deal of the century was the COVID shutdown. 120 days later after the deal of the century was when we saw those BLM riders start their stuff. And then 190 days later was when we had a fiery furnace type time frame that was in August of 2020, which it actually kind of started on Obama's birthday, um, August 4th. Um, so if I'm remembering correctly, or it's either his real birthday or whatever, Gregorian birthday or his Hebrew birthday, was when the fiery furnace started. Oh wait, I can look it up really quick. Um, um, yeah, 8/4 when Obama turned 61 was when I believe because that was actually that big explosion in Lebanon. Okay. So kind of interesting that now we're kind of back in that time frame of dealing with Lebanon. Okay. So then we saw with Biden's Saudi deal, quote unquote, that happened 1290 days after the deal of the century. Okay, so we see there's a lot of biblical numbers that show up all over the place. Okay, that's how you know prophecy is being fulfilled. With Biden's Saudi deal, 70 days later was when the U.S. bases were attacked. And then 60 days later was when Hamas had their attack on October 7th. Okay, so that was 60 days after Biden, was, running around saying, we're going to make peace with Saudi, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. And so I thought that was interesting because it took 120 days, so I kind of connect like the BLM rioters to like the Lion's Den. And then you could say that Hamas, their attack on Israel is the Lion's Den. And then, because what I believe with the deal of the century, we saw, we like first we had the shutdown, then we had the BLM rioters, which would be a type of Lion's Den, and then we saw the fiery furnace. Okay. And so I think what we can look for is fulfillments of the Lion's Den and the fiery furnace. So definitely Hamas attack relates to the Lion's Den, because of the Israelis being made hostages. That connects to Daniel being in the Lion's Den. And then I guess, so the U.S. bases being attacked could be a type of fiery furnace. Okay. Anyways, so the fact that Hamas's attack was 60 days after Biden's Saudi deal, it makes me wonder if God's judgment is faster. Instead of 120 days, it was 60 days with Biden. Okay, so that's a thought that I had. The UN resolution that I talked about was 1292 days after 9/11/2020. Um, and like I said, the day after was the bridge collapse. And then 9 days later was the start of the tornadoes. 24 days later was when the protesters showed up. And then 9 weeks later was when the fiery furnace started in June. Okay. So we see kind of those patterns being repeated. And then, with Biden halting the weapons, couldn't come up with a 1290 day for that connection. But 50 to 51 days later was the debate. 55 days later was when they gave Trump presidential immunity. 25 days later was when the fiery furnace started on June 1st. 62 days later was Hurricane Beryl. Okay. And then coming up, so we don't know what's going to happen on these dates, but 68 days later is July 14th, 69 days later is July 15th, and then 73 days later is July 18th. Okay, so we'll see what happens on those dates. So I've said this a million times, don't go either left or right, okay? There are criminals on the left, there are criminals on the right. Jesus is in the middle. He's not, Jesus had two criminals on the cross, on his right side and on his left side. Okay, it's a prophetic picture of the day that we're in right now. So they're, criminals on the right and criminals on the left. Okay, especially now we've seen it with, so just recently the Republicans have decided, they gave up, like, so for years and years and years the Republicans have been the pro-life party. Okay, and then now with Trump and his influence, they given up on that, and now they're just talking about states' rights related to abortion. And so the Republican Party is changing, okay, under Trump's influence. Okay, it's no longer the traditional Republican Party. so we see how, we're losing. I mean, it's kind of God's people are definitely in slavery. Okay, we're no longer okay. Like when Jesus was born, there was no room for them in the inn. Okay, we're at that point in America where there's no room for God's people in the inn. Okay, or we no longer have influence over. We've lost our influence in the going ons in this country. Okay, so just full slavery. Um, so we saw in so just really quickly talk about Back to the Future. I was gonna do a whole movie on the prophecies with Back to the Future because it's amazing, like the prophecies that we find in that movie. So we saw 9/11, in um, Back to the Future. Um, um, and then there's 1335, um, clue in Back to the Future. Um, then we also see like a picture of with the helicopter. We see the helicopter shines on the bench that says it's supposed to say raisins, but red the drunk is blocking the end, so it looks like racy. Okay, so interesting that the helicopter is lighting up the bench that says racy. So remember that racy um, from Iran died in a helicopter crash. Okay. Um, so then what's interesting too is that we have Doc is being shot at by the Libyans, but he has a wimpy gun. Is that a picture of Israel without weapons? Or is that going to be a picture of what happens to Biden because he took away the weapons from Israel? Um, so Marty is the 5, so 133, and then Marty makes the 5. Okay, because he has 5 letters in his name. Okay, so I'll talk about this because this was really kind of interesting. So October 21st was when they went into the future, and what's interesting is that October 21st is Netanyahu's birthday. Okay, and then what was very interesting was that the debate was the 10th month, the 21st day on the Hebrew calendar. Okay. So I thought that was really interesting. And so when Marty goes into the future on October 21st, he goes into the 80s cafe. And so on the screen is a picture of Reagan and then the Iran guy. Okay, and the Iran guy keeps saying, "You must have the hostage special. You must have the hostage special." Okay, and so I think the screen could be a prophetic picture of the debate. Okay, that happens on the 10th month, the 21st day. Okay, and then Biden would be the one saying, "You must have the hostage special," because Biden has been pushing, his trying to get a hostage deal, to look like, some great savior. Um, he's been pushing it for a really long time. Okay. I mean, that usually means that Israel is supposed to stop fighting and all that stuff. The only thing is that Reagan's like on the right, and then, or let's see, I guess if you're looking at it, Reagan's on the right, and then the Iran guy is on the left, on your left, the viewer's left. So I guess that works, doesn't it? Saying you must have the hostage special. So that I definitely think that's a prophecy that we saw fulfilled. Um, but then it says all hell breaks loose when Marty's kid shows up. So that's a picture of twins. Okay, so I definitely think like Trump and Biden are twins. Okay, they're both criminals. They both took documents. They're both old. So anyways, And definitely when Trump returns, I think we're going to see all hell break loose. And then we also read in the scriptures with twins. Well, God talks about like those who are with child and those who are in labor. There's kind of this picture of the labor pains, but then there's also a child that's already been born. Okay. And so I think that could be that now, like we had the birthing of Trump on the 27th. Um, and then, wait, so I didn't put this in here. I'm going to look this up. It comes from Revelation. Um, in Revelation 12, we read about it. It says, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And she was with child, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. So I think there's kind of this hidden picture where there's already a child, but then she's already with one child, but she's in labor to give and in pain to give birth. Okay, so I think we entered that time frame now where the child that the woman is with is Trump. Okay, so Trump has returned, but the woman is still in labor because she's going to give birth to the Messiah. Okay, and we see, like, some of those twin stories, the births of the twins, um um because like Rachel, so Rachel dies right before they get into the land. Okay, I think it's Rachel. um and um and she gives birth to Benjamin, but she actually calls Benjamin Ben-Oni first, and then Jacob calls him Benjamin. And so that's like kind of a picture of um it says, it came about as her soul was departing, for she died, that she named him Ben-Oni. This is in Genesis 35. But his father called him Benjamin. So it's almost like she's given birth. It's a hidden prophecy of two sons. Okay. And it's like Ben-Oni is the son of my sorrow. So that could be a picture of Trump. But then Benjamin, the son of my right hand, is a picture of the Messiah. Okay. And then and Rachel could be a picture of Biden. Okay. So, you know, um, uh, or America, like dying right before they get into the land. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. Um, okay, so we're definitely fulfilling those prophecies. Um, so just a lot of sixes in um, Back to the Future. Um, the burning bush, so this picture from Back to the Future relates to the burning bush. So I wrote June 2024 is fiery furnace. Are we out of time? And we've seen that, the fires have continued into July. Okay. And the heat. Like now we're in the dog days of summer start on July 3rd, but we definitely were experiencing dog days of summer before that, during June, which is unusual. Um, and so then I'm wondering, since we're finishing up the Easter, Passover, Pentecost season, are we moving out of the Shavuot season? So are we moving into the Sukkot season on the Gregorian calendar? So Sukkot happens on the Hebrew calendar, the 7th month, the 15th day through the 21st day. So I'm wondering if maybe we're going to see a fulfillment on the Gregorian calendar. We're going to move into a Sukkot time frame on July 15th through the 21st. Okay. But then does the Messiah come back on the first day? The 15th, does the Messiah come back on the 8th day, which would be the 22nd? What's very interesting is that July 14th, so right before July 15th, is 2 full years of Biden starting his messing with Israel. Because what happened was on 7/14/2022 was when Biden signed that paper with Lapid. And that's where we found out for sure that he was going to be working on a two-state solution for Israel. Okay. So now we've had 2 full years of Biden messing with Israel, and we see that 2 full years time frame like in Genesis 40. And then 719. So 719, and what's interesting about that is that that's 8 years after Trump and Pence were named the candidates. So Trumpants. And then that, like I said, that's the day of the 42 months of Biden. Okay, so those are an interesting date, kind of in the middle of the week or the middle of the Sukkot week. And then, like I said, 7/7 is the 9 month date of war in Israel. So July 17th is 9 month, 11 days of war. So that could be a significant date to look at. Like the 17th and the 18th, right in the middle of the Sukkot week. 17 and 18 connects to the fall of Babylon in Revelation 17 and Revelation 18. But we also see it's Tammuz 11, which Tammuz is like the 11th month because it's leap year, so that would be 11 on July 17th. So we could see something happen on those dates. So definitely that whole week is a high watch date. Okay, all the way from the 14th through the 22nd. So we'll see what happens. I mean, something significant could happen during those dates. And then I have too, July 16th is 1335 days from Biden's 78th birthday. What I thought was interesting about that, so that was his birthday in 2020. What I thought was interesting is now Trump is 78 years old. Okay. And, I think that 78 number is significant because it's showing a picture of how we're going to go from the 7th king to the 8th king. So that's the deal. And I talked about how June 27th was like Biden's 50th day, and then that connects to the handwriting on the wall in Daniel. And I don't know which chapter in Daniel. But I think Biden is missing the handwriting on the wall. I mean, he is definitely falling. Okay, and he's missing that. Okay. So that's what I think about that. So are you in the sea of Biden or in the sea of Trump? You want to be in the middle with Messiah on the dry land where there's no lies. So I'm sure I had a million bazillion other things I wanted to tell you. But that kind of sums it up for June 2024. Like I said, I think we entered into a fiery furnace phase. So then maybe the next phase that we'll move into is another lion's den type of thing, with Trump's people, being the lions this time. So we'll see what happens. I mean, it was interesting how during Trump that we had the BLM rioters, and so then now with Biden, I mean, because when we had the pro Hamas or pro Palestinian protesters, I mean, they were kind of on the same, side as Biden. Okay, so they weren't really a big problem for Biden. And so that's why I'm wondering if his lion's den is going to be Trump's people returning to start the Civil War. So that's what I got going for you. So thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you tuning in. And hopefully that helps you understand our time frame. I really think Messiah is at the door. So we saw that, Jesus did not return on Shavuot, but, he's still going to come back someday. And it was interesting that Biden, I did want to point this out. So Biden in his so Biden, did bad at the debate, and so then he did a interview with George Stephanopoulos to try to help his you know reputation, but it didn't really work. He was still kind of came across as old in that interview. Well, so in that interview, Biden said, okay, so they were talking about, because George Stephanopoulos was like saying, are you going to take a cognitive test? And Biden says, well, I take a cognitive test every day. He says, not only am I campaigning, but I'm running the world. Okay, so I think it's really interesting because a lot of the prophets that I watch on YouTube are still waiting for the Antichrist to come. Okay, um, and they're still waiting for the Antichrist with his one world government to come in the future. And they're missing that Biden is already that Antichrist figure who's running the world. Okay, so they're missing that. Okay, um, I mean, so he said that. He admitted that he's running the world, okay, or at least trying to run the world like he's some kind of savior. And then it's interesting too, because in the debate he said, if the Lord Almighty came down and said, Joe, get out of the race, I'll get out of the race. But the Lord Almighty is not coming down. Okay, well, George Stephanopoulos agreed with him that the Lord Almighty is not coming down. Okay, so these would be a picture of like scoffers saying, well, Jesus isn't coming back soon. Um, so definitely very interesting that Biden said that. Okay, because we might not have seen Jesus on Shavuot, but it doesn't mean that he's not at the door. That we're not going to see him very soon. Okay, so that's what I'm thinking. So I'm glad I remembered to say that because that was really important. So, like I said, Biden is the beast from the sea, Trump is the beast from the earth. Um, the beast from the earth comes after the beast from the sea. Um, so, so I mean, we have just been fulfilling prophecy left and right. So, anyways, so thank you so much for tuning in. God bless. Hang in there. I know it's hard right now, but we're going to be so blessed when Jesus returns. So hang in there. God bless. Thanks for tuning in.